Every religion and every spiritual tradition is very appealing, probably because they all make a promise that may take the form of eternal bliss, eternal peace, or the capacity or the possibility of merging ourselves into the one. And that's what makes them very, very attractive. And each tradition, each spiritual tradition, offers several paths that might suit for different peoples. These paths tend to be of three kinds, I would say. There is a path of service, a path of devotion, and a path of knowledge. Each one of these paths offers a different possibility to achieve this goal. That is to say, they offer different possibilities for different people, or maybe we should say for different profiles of seekers after truth who are trying to achieve this final goal. So each one of these paths have very specific characteristics that might be very easy to follow for different sorts of seekers. On the one hand, we have service. Service is related to the fact that we are instruments of God, of life, of the universe, however you would like to conceptualize it. We are instruments aimed at serving others, at serving human beings, at serving every sentient being. So in that sense, we should try to find in which way and what kind of instrument we are. Whether we are called to be useful for people in trying to help them achieve their own goals, or helping them getting rid of some obstacles, or, well, there are so many possibilities in which each one of us might turn him or herself into a tool that might help other sentient beings achieve their own goals. So when we are talking about the path of service, we're speaking about turning oneself into something useful for the other person in such a way that what really matters is not us, but the other person or the other sentient being, in such a way that we are not aiming at any kind of a reward. So, as in the Bhagavad Gita is wonderfully explained, the Karma Yoga, the path of service, is the path in which we just want the best for the other, just because this is the way in which things should be. And we are not expecting any kind of reward out of that contribution or out of that behavior aiming at making the other person's life better. In this path, the path of Karma Yoga, the path of service, it is also a path of action. That is to say, it is a path in which we are called to engage ourselves in everyday activities with people, trying to make their everyday lives much better. It has to do with what we do without expectation to ourselves. The true Karma Yoga, or the true path of action, according to the Indian sages, for instance in the Bhagavad Gita, is the one in which there's even no I who is behaving or actively engaged in a compassionate manner towards the other. There's no I who is expecting, and there's no I who is really deciding. The behavior or the action is done just because it needs to be done. And this is quite interesting for us as Western people, because we tend to think always as if we are an agent, as if there is an I who is deciding to do this or that. In the Karma Yoga, in the path of service and action, there should be no I doing what the person is doing, and no I expecting any sort of reward. So you're just transparent as the instrument that life wants us to be for the rest of humans and other sentient beings. For other profiles of seekers after truth, for other sort of people, one could say, devotion is the best path to follow this objective, this goal of attaining eternal peace. In the path of devotion, the person annihilates him or herself before something much, much bigger, who or which transcends him or herself. It is a path in which the person understands that his or her own existence is in the hands of God. It's in the hands of any sort of divinity whatsoever. So it's very interesting because the person understands that his or her own existence is real only in a relative sense, because the ultimate reality is something that transcends his or her own existence. The path of devotion has a very particular merit, which is it is a very easy to follow path. It only requires sincerity and deep love in the heart of the devotee. It is a path in which the seeker after truth is a person who really hopes to feel in intimacy a very deep relationship with divinity. And that involves a kind of a personal relationship. That is why in the devotional path, which is called the Bhakti Yoga, as I mentioned before, is a path in which each person has a personal deity. It doesn't matter whether it is understood as one God for all, or if it is just one manifestation of God for myself, with the one with which I can really connect. So it just involves realizing that we are in the hands of divinity in such a way that we should surrender our own will to God's will, in a way in which we can really become the instrument. And this is here, and here it is where we can connect the Bhakti and the Karma Yoga, becoming an instrument through becoming aware of the fact that we are sustained, we are supported by God. Besides the path of service and the path of devotion, there is the path of knowledge. Here it's very important to distinguish between knowledge in the way that these mystical traditions have conceived this concept from the one that we use in the Western world. When we talk about knowledge in a mystical sense or in a spiritual tradition, we are not speaking about a theoretical model or some sort of analytical or discursive reasoning, but we are speaking about a direct apprehension of truth in terms of who we are, and what existence is. So knowledge is inseparable from becoming. And this is very important because it is a realm in which the fact of gradually knowing involves gradually becoming that which we are trying to know. So we are transforming ourselves, our consciousness, into that we are trying to understand. So to know is to become. And this is a very important point to keep in mind when we are talking about the path of knowledge, or Jnana Yoga, or it's probably the path of the Logos for the Greeks. So in this path, there are two very important aspects. One is related to discernment, to be able to discern in one's own experience between what is self from what is not self, not in a psychological, but in an ontological way. That is to say, to really grasp in an immediate way the real nature of our being, on the one hand, and there we use discernment. On the other hand, we use self-inquiry. Self-inquiry involves contemplation in such a way that we become the witness of our own consciousness, the witness of our own experience of being an I in the world. In that way, we may distinguish what appears to be I from what really is some sort of a film, a movie that is presented to me, which is the real I, the witness which is just observing and discerning, but it's not really being part of the play. So self-inquiry and discernment are two tools in the path of knowledge which are very important, and both of them will be nurtured by the scriptures. So to study the scriptures is a very important way in which we may learn to distinguish where we should focus our attention, our efforts, and where should our experience go in a way to be able to differentiate whether we are getting closer to our goal, which is to realize our own nature, or we are getting farther and farther from it. So the path of knowledge is a path which involves discernment, discipline, contemplation. Can you recognize yourself as maybe someone more inclined to devotion or to service, or maybe there is some sort of proneness in yourself towards knowledge? If you can identify yourself at least partially with some or a combination of this path, it might be easier for you to understand in what sense and what kind of spiritual practices and disciplines you may integrate in your life. This might make spirituality something that's very close to each one of us, and not something that we have to following certain commandments or things that might not make sense to you. So I would particularly emphasize that it's quite important to know ourselves in terms of what kind of seeker after truth may I be. If I can see, I can picture that, maybe I can choose a path that might suit my own bias, my own inclinations, but most of all, my own preferences that might be what God has given to me to look after Him. There have been several discussions among the sages and philosophers about which one of these three paths is the best one. And of course, there are different opinions. To some people, the path of service is the greatest because you really become transparent, non-existent in a psychological way, but become what you really are, or what you really are, ontologically speaking. For other people, devotion is the greatest because you can really experience in the intimate of your heart the truth of God and the truth that you are sustained by God. And for some other people, the greatest of the path is the path of knowledge. And the reason is that because they assume that ignorance of our own nature is what keeps us trapped, so to speak, in this idea of being separate entities in the middle of a universe who can be sometimes threatening. They say that in the path of knowledge, we gradually become that one that we are trying to apprehend, comprehend, understand. And it is not a path of union, which is the case in the devotional path, where the devotee will become united with God, but it is a path of unity in which you realize that there were never two, just one. That is why the path of knowledge reaches us to what some people call non-duality.